Happy strike season to you. That's what we're talking about this evening. The strikes, they seem to almost be continuous these days. We're joined by somebody who's well versed in this particular area of labour, Andrew Levy from Andrew Levy Associates. Nice to have you in the studio, Andrew.
It's very nice to be with you too. Thank you, Jeremy.
Pleasure. I have a feeling, and please tell me if I'm right or wrong here, the unions of late, and I'm talking in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, seem to, for want of a better word, seem to have been colluding and are very much more a broader force than single unions in approaching these strikes that we're having.
It's unquestionably correct. Now, you know, one of the things that Cassato does well, and when we talk about the unions and we talk about Cassato, frankly, they're the only game in town. There are a couple of others here and there, but that is the main driving force. And Cassato, probably since 2007, has been taking a very, very strong and very coordinated approach right across the bargaining in all of its industries. Now, the Cassato unions are what we call industry unions. So it doesn't matter what job you do. If you're in mining, you join our union. If you're in petrochemicals, you join our union. And all of these unions get together once a year before bargaining season, so to speak, and they determine what their approach is going to be. And this year in particular, they've taken a very, very strong coordinated approach, and the magic number is double digit. So that's what they're looking for. And they've been getting it, albeit at the lower end of the spectrum. So the lowest paid have been getting the highest. It's been staggered upwards, and that's not a bad thing. But the approach to bargaining this year has been particularly coordinated and particularly unyielding. I think many of the strikes we've seen in the last couple of weeks we need not have seen.
In what way? Do you think they could have been resolved around a table?
Yes, I do. And I think one says this simply because if we look at the position of both parties before they broke, they were a long way away. The unions were well up in double figures. And in reality, when the parties are very far apart, it's indicative of either one of them doesn't want to move, or in fact they're not negotiating particularly well. But what it also means is that where that is the case, one of the two parties is going to have to move a lot to bring the settlement within the range of what economics determines. And what has been happening is they've been striking within 3 meetings before they've even really found each other, holding out at 14, 15%, and then settling at 8.5%. They could have found each other sooner had they wanted to.
I think another thing about the strikes that we've seen this year is there's been more willingness from management to pay for the time that was downtime during the strike. Would that be right or not really?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the golden rule is you don't pay people for going on strike. Now, unfortunately, that rule gets bent occasionally, particularly in the public sector, where they take the sort of a strike now, pay later approach, which is absolutely wrong. So if we take the big strike in the public sector last year, the employees lost 6 weeks' pay. And normally when they come back to work, there's a queue of people outside the pay office wanting welfare loans. And the employer normally says, you want a loan? Go and talk to your union. They advise you to do this. But in the public sector, what they said is, okay, we won't dock your pay, we will make deductions over a period of time so it doesn't appear to be too painful. And because December is Christmas, we wouldn't want you to have an unhappy Christmas, so we'll pay you full salary. January is always a tough month, you don't have much money, we wouldn't like you to be sad then, so we'll pay you then as well. And in fact, they have only just sort of end of March, April, finished paying for that strike. Now, that really defeats the whole purpose. But as a general rule, no, I don't think employers are willing to put their hand in their pocket and pay for the dental care for the teeth that bite them, so to speak.
What effect, Andrew, do you think the public sector strikes are having on the private sector? Because, you know, to me, public sector is always easily justified because it's you and I that are paying those people's salaries. It's not, and we're not shareholders.
Yeah. Once again, Jeremy, I think you've hit the nail on the head. what actually happened in around about 2007, although it began to move before then, is that the public sector went to the top of the settlement league. So the biggest settlements were in the public sector. Now, normally they're at the bottom end of the pay league. But because the public sector, A, has the greatest density of union membership within it, so the unions are strongest there, B, because the government has an odd relationship with its employees. On the one hand, the employer is their boss. On the other hand, the employees are the voters, and that's important. And so they have settled at levels which really, if you relate it to output and productivity and efficiency in the public sector, should never have happened. And that has set the tone for the private sector. And so the unions say, well, if we're getting 12% in the public sector, we need that in the private sector. Now, of course, equally, as you pointed out, the public sector is not a good comparator because at the end of the day, they don't have to survive on a profit. If they need more money to meet wages, which is now 60% of their wage bill, and when we talk public sector, it's not only government, it's municipalities, then in point of fact, all they do is they raise taxes or some kind of levy, or they deflect money out of the sort of infrastructural budget and they put it into wages. And so people end up having, I suppose, protests about non-delivery, and all that happens is our taxes go up. So it's a very, very unfortunate issue. And sadly, and this is true of many negotiations in South Africa, not only the public sector, it's worse in the public sector, there is no relationship of the wage increase to increases in efficiency. Now, that doesn't mean people losing jobs. It just means that the employer needs to recoup the cost of the wage increase. Otherwise, it just gets passed on and becomes an inflationary pressure, and so we go on.
But how are we going to break this cycle? Because in my view, and I may be wrong, but in my view, the public servants are going to continue striking for inordinately higher wages because they've got away with it.
Yes, exactly.
And that's going to fuel the private sector.
Exactly. It ends in one of two ways. Either there is a kind of social compact or social contract where Labour, government and management, employers get together and say, guys, let's agree wage norms. Let's agree that for the sake of growth, job creation, maintaining low inflation, etc., no wage increases will be above 8 or 8.5%. There's very little chance of that happening with the current conflictual relationship between the parties. The other possibility, which seems equally remote at this point, is that the government takes a stand with the public sector. Yeah, exactly. You know, you look at the public sector and you think of the words of Winston Churchill, seldom in the field of human work has so much been paid to so many for doing, very little. And as long as there is no relationship between pay and output, then in point of fact, service goes down, taxes go up, it spills over into the private sector, and we see strikes because the private sector cannot afford those levels of settlement. So I think we're all looking to government for some kind of leadership or decisive action. And so we wait. But that's the only way it's going to end, frankly.
The problem there, though, when I say there, I'm referring to looking to government for some sort of action, is that the alliance partner is the biggest union movement in the country.
Exactly. And they understand that and they use that leverage. And until such time as, government is prepared to tackle that with the political consequences, we remain as we are. But I think what Cassato is doing, and they are nothing if not past masters at understanding how to use politics and how to use power, what they are doing is saying, look, we're not going to rely solely on our influence with government through the alliance. Let's go back to what we do well. Let's organize people on factory floors. And also remembering their glory days, probably the MDM in the late 80s, where they managed to mobilize both trade unions and communities. They are taking quite a broad stand on let's stamp out corruption in high places in order to try and bring the communities along with them. And then they're saying, well, government, even if you turn against us, we've still got the support. We've still got the hearts and minds on the ground. And I think to a large extent, part of this year's strike phase is understood by Cassato showing we've still got the forces on the ground. We can still, bring them out if we need to. And that may be an important lesson for them to demonstrate because the economics of the strikes are not rational.
I know that you're not you're not a politician, but from a legal point of view and a Labour point of view, is this not a sign that Cassato is possibly trying to influence a broader mass outside of its card-carrying members with a view to possibly breaking away and becoming a political party on its own?
Certainly the first part I can answer with confidence. Absolutely. It is part of an organised strategy to have an independent power base which stretches beyond people in employment, i.e. the normal union members, because they know with the huge levels of unemployment that we have right now, that their power can never be complete if they limit it. So unquestionably, they're doing that. Now, whether at some point in the future they see this as the basis of a parliamentary Labour Party or whatever, we have to see. I mean, nominally they're still aligned to the SACP, the Communist Party, but they're never going to do anything. So it may well happen. That lies a little bit beyond, I suppose, A, my area of expertise, and B, beyond the horizon I'm looking at. But you can't rule it out, certainly. What we could say, for sure, if we inverted the problem and simply said, for any party that seeks to gain political power and influence, the friendship and alliance of Cassato is vital, then that is certainly true.
So they still remain a very strong force in South Africa?
Without question. Without question. At every level, they are important. And I think that we see this practically because up until now, government, despite having said so on at least 3 occasions, have failed to take them on. Now, it may well be that we're seeing the first indications of what might vaguely be described as a suspicion of backbone in government. And that is that they seem to be fairly fixed on their plan to subsidise wages for new entrants to the labour market, i.e. the large number of young black people who haven't got jobs. Now, that's based on suspension of minimum wages and some of the legal protections on dismissal. Cassato doesn't like that, but government is going through with it. Now, that's a positive. The other thing that seems to be indicative is that Cassato's attitude towards the whole labour broker question is they must be banned. They can't have labour brokers. That's not going to happen. There will be regulation, there will be tight regulation, but once again it's an indication that government is not giving Cassato what it wants, but it's not been prepared to stand up and say anything publicly. So that's still in the wash, so to speak.
I want to come back to this minimum wage issue in just a moment because it's something that has raised its head over the past few months.